The message arrived at 8:14 p.m. on my 69th birthday. 2 sentences. That was all it took. My son wrote, "We need space from you. Please don't reach out anymore." Below it, a tiny red heart appeared. His wife had liked the message. For a moment, I just stared at the screen. You may recognize that feeling, when silence suddenly becomes louder than anything anyone could say. My house was quiet that night. Too quiet for a place that once held birthday dinners, laughter, and the chaos of a growing family. I wasn't asking for gifts, not a party, just a phone call. Instead, I got a dismissal. A polite, corporate-style termination of fatherhood. So I did the only thing a man can do when respect disappears. I gave them exactly what they asked for. Space. I blocked their numbers. Then I made one phone call to my attorney. And by the time the sun rose the next morning, their credit cards stopped working. Their penthouse wasn't theirs. The $30,000 monthly allowance vanished. And by noon, my phone had logged 109 missed calls. But that wasn't the real story. The real story is what happens when someone mistakes kindness for weakness. And what happens when silence finally answers back. Some birthdays grow quieter with age. Mine had never felt this quiet. The grandfather clock in my living room ticked steadily against the walls of a house far too large for one man. My late wife used to joke that the place echoed like a museum after closing hours. That evening, it felt exactly like that. Empty. I sat in the leather chair near the window, the same one Anna always said made me look too serious. Outside, the Connecticut hills were fading into dusk. 69 years old, and the two people I'd built everything for hadn't even called. Maybe they were busy. That's what I told myself. Leo had his consulting projects. His wife Madison ran social media campaigns for luxury brands. Busy people. Important people. Still, a son usually remembers his father's birthday. At least that's what I believed. After a long moment, I picked up my phone and typed a message. Not dramatic. Not emotional. Just simple. Just wanted to say I love you both. Hope you're having a good week. I stared at the screen before pressing send. Some of you know that quiet hesitation when pride and loneliness sit in the same chair. Then the phone buzzed almost immediately. For a second, my heart lifted. Maybe they were about to say happy birthday after all. Instead, I read the message that changed everything. 2 sentences. That was all. We need space from you. Please don't reach out anymore. No explanation. No context. Just distance. At first, my mind refused to process it. Parents are strange that way. We look for alternate meanings even when the words are painfully clear. Maybe Leo was joking. Maybe Madison had typed it. Maybe something was wrong. But then I saw the small icon beneath the message. A red heart. Madison liked this message. That was the moment the illusion collapsed. Because liking that message wasn't passive agreement, it was applause. You may recognize that silence when something inside you finally snaps, not loudly, but like a slow fracture deep in the foundation. Memories started connecting themselves. The $600,000 down payment I gave them for their Tribeca penthouse. The Range Rover Madison drove. The endless credit card bills quietly routed to my accounts. 6 months earlier, Leo had called asking for $200,000 for a startup idea. When I suggested he might invest his own savings first, he laughed. "Dad, this is my capital. It's family money." Family money. I walked to the window and stared across the lawn my wife and I planted 30 years earlier. For the first time, a thought formed clearly in my mind. Maybe the problem wasn't them. Maybe the problem was me. Because I had given my son everything. Everything, except a reason to respect the man who gave it. Something strange happens when heartbreak settles long enough. It turns into clarity. The sadness that had been sitting in my chest slowly cooled into something calmer, something sharper. Resolve. You cannot negotiate with entitlement. You can only remove the supply that feeds it. I walked back to the table and picked up my phone again. My hands were steady now. First, I opened Leo's contact information. Then I pressed block caller. A confirmation window appeared. I didn't hesitate. Next came Madison. Block. Just like that, the silence they requested became complete. But this time, it was on my terms. Then I made another call. The line rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Sterling and Associates. David, I said calmly. It's Robert. There was a pause. David Sterling had been my attorney and my friend for more than 30 years. Everything okay? He asked. Yes, I said. For the first time that evening, I meant it. Actually, everything just became very clear. What can I do for you? I looked at the phone screen where my son's message still glowed faintly. We need to meet tomorrow morning. About the trust? Yes. I paused for a moment before adding the most important sentence. It's time to make some changes. And those changes were about to turn my son's entire world upside down. The next morning, the drive to Stamford felt strangely peaceful. Autumn had settled over Connecticut in that clean, expensive way it does in towns where every hedge is trimmed and every stone wall seems older than memory. I drove past orange maples and church steeples with the calm of a man who had finally stopped arguing with reality. David Sterling's office occupied the top floor of a glass building overlooking Long Island Sound. Quiet power lived there. Leather chairs, old wood, controlled voices. The kind of place where fortunes changed hands without anyone raising their voice. David met me in his office without small talk. He knew better. He wore a charcoal suit, silver tie, and the expression of a man who had seen too many families confuse money with love. I told him exactly what happened. The birthday, my text, Leo's reply, Madison's little red heart. David listened without interruption, his fingers folded over a thick leather file. When I finished, he leaned back and said, I've been expecting this conversation for years. That caught my attention. He gave a tired half-smile. Since Leo's 35th birthday dinner, he thanked you for seed funding his lifestyle. Not his future, his lifestyle. Some of you know that feeling when someone else says aloud the truth you were still trying not to believe. David turned the file toward me. On the cover, embossed in gold, the Hale Family Revocable Trust. Everything significant, he said, runs through this. And I was about to learn just how much of my son's life had never really belonged to him. David opened the trust like a surgeon opening a chart. His voice turned precise, professional. The Tribeca penthouse is held by the trust. The vehicle leases are in the trust's name. Several premium credit lines are backed by trust assets. The monthly disbursement of $30,000 is automatic unless revoked. He let that sit between us. Then he explained the part I should have remembered all along. It's revocable, Robert. You are the grantor and sole trustee, which means the control never left your hands. You can amend it, reduce it, suspend it, or eliminate beneficiaries entirely. Eliminate beneficiaries entirely. I looked down at the document and felt something close to embarrassment. For years, I had treated the trust like a promise to my son. In truth, it was a machine, a mechanism, and I had been using it to finance my own humiliation. David slid a summary page across the desk. If you want this to end, he said, we can turn it off in stages or all at once. I didn't need stages. I thought of the message again. Please don't reach out anymore. How simple it had sounded. How expensive that sentence was about to become. Everything, I said. David studied me carefully. Everything? The allowance, the cards, the penthouse, the cars, every line of support. He nodded once, already making notes. We can start immediately. I sat back in the leather chair and felt no anger at all. Only certainty. You may recognize that feeling too the moment mercy stops being kindness and starts becoming self-betrayal. David capped his pen. Then let's proceed. And somewhere in Manhattan, though they didn't know it yet, my son and his wife were about to discover what life felt like when privilege met a locked door. By lunchtime, the first crack appeared. I didn't witness it. I didn't need to. After enough years providing someone's comforts, you begin to understand exactly where the panic will start. It started, I imagine, at a restaurant with white tablecloths and waiters who moved like diplomats. Leo and Madison liked places where the menu never listed prices unless you asked, places where money wasn't discussed because it was assumed, their natural habitat. The meal would have ended the way it always did, with a leather folder placed discreetly beside Leo's elbow. He would have smiled that easy smile and slipped out his titanium card without even glancing at the total. Why would he? Consequences had never been part of the experience. Then the waiter returned. Quietly, apologetically. Sir, I'm sorry, but the card appears to have been declined. Leo would have laughed first. That short, offended laugh of someone who thinks the universe made a clerical error. Run it again. They did. Declined. He would have handed over another card, then Madison another. Declined. Declined. Around them, lunch continued. Glasses clinked. Low conversation drifted. But at their table, the air would have changed temperature. I could picture Madison lowering her voice through clenched teeth. What is going on? Leo, already irritated, would reach for his phone. Dad's office handles all this. That was the phrase that mattered. Dad's office handles all this. Not I do, not we do. He called me. Straight to voicemail. He texted. Undelivered. He tried again. Same result. That familiar silence had found him now. And for the first time in his adult life, my son was beginning to understand that access and ownership are not the same thing. The allowance failed the next morning. That was when confusion became fear. $30,000 had landed in their checking account every month for years, as predictably as sunrise. It paid for groceries they never bought themselves, memberships they never thought about, deliveries, subscriptions, flowers, staff, parking, wine clubs, and all the invisible machinery that made a curated life feel effortless. Then one month, it simply didn't arrive. No warning. No explanation. Just absence. Madison would have refreshed the banking app repeatedly, as if impatience could generate funds. Leo would have called again from another number. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. Their world had always rested on the assumption that inconvenience was temporary and solvable. A call to Dad, a transfer, a correction. But this time, the wall held. Some of you know that weight the moment people stop hearing your voice because they finally need something from you, and for once, you refuse to answer in the old language. I spent that day in my woodshop. Cedar shavings curled across the floor while sunlight cut through the high windows. I sanded the edge of a small keepsake box I had been building for no one in particular. The radio was off. My phone stayed face down on the workbench. Silence, I discovered, can be medicinal when it no longer belongs to loneliness. By evening, David called with a calm update. The cards are inactive. Allowance terminated. Next wave should begin within 48 hours. Next wave? He turned a page. Service interruptions. I almost smiled. Because luxury rarely collapses in one dramatic blow, it dies circuit by circuit. And somewhere in a Manhattan apartment filled with things they thought signified success, my son and his wife were about to meet the first truly inconvenient version of reality. The cleaning service was first. That seemed fitting. Entitlement hates dust because dust reveals who actually maintains a life. Madison would have expected the usual Thursday arrival, the women in neat navy uniforms, the citrus scent of polished counters, the vanishing of every trace of disorder before lunch. When no one came, she likely checked her phone with annoyance rather than concern. Then the message arrived. Service agreement suspended due to non-payment. Not delayed. Not rescheduled. Suspended. The gym came next. Leo's key fob denied him entry in front of a glass lobby and a receptionist young enough to call him sir with practiced sympathy. Then the meal delivery stopped. The dog walker texted. The sommelier's subscription club lapsed. Streaming accounts vanished one by one. Reserved parking access failed. Small inconveniences, perhaps. Unless your identity is built on effortless access. Then they are humiliations. You may recognize that feeling in reverse, how dignity returns when the people who treated your support like oxygen suddenly notice the air is different. I did not celebrate. That's important. This wasn't joy. It was correction. That afternoon, I walked my property line, hands in my coat pockets, while dry leaves skittered over the gravel path. Anna used to say, October told the truth about every garden. What thrived, what was overgrown, what needed cutting back. She was right about more than roses. By evening, the unknown calls had multiplied. Some were angry, some urgent. One voicemail from Leo tried humor, the way frightened men sometimes do. Dad, very funny, call me. It wasn't funny. And for the first time, I think he was beginning to suspect that, because when privilege disappears, it doesn't only take comfort. It takes the illusion that you are still in control. And theirs was unraveling faster than even I expected. Within a week, they started selling things. Pride always goes first, though people rarely admit it. I pictured the scene with painful clarity. Madison standing in front of a mirrored closet, pulling down handbags I had purchased for birthdays and anniversaries that were not mine. Leo opening a watch box lined in cream suede, lifting out the Swiss timepiece I gave him at 35. Objects are honest. They reveal more than people do. Every item in that apartment carried a receipt with my fingerprints on it. And now those gifts were being converted into emergency cash. Not at pawn shops, of course. Their vanity would never allow that. They would have gone to curated consignment stores on Madison Avenue, pretending they were editing their collection while silently praying the check cleared before the next bill hit. There's a special kind of humiliation in having to monetize the very symbols you once used to impress other people. Some of you know that weight. The moment appearance stops working. The moment labels no longer protect you. Their calls became more emotional after that, less indignant, more frantic. One voicemail from Madison came late at night. Her tone was soft, performative, almost tender. Robert, we're worried about you. Leo thinks maybe you're overwhelmed. Please just let us know you're okay. Not one word about my birthday. Not one word about the message. Only concern shaped like leverage. I deleted it. That's a familiar silence, too, the one where you finally stop responding to manipulation because you can hear the script underneath it. That evening, I poured myself a small glass of bourbon and sat in the den where Anna and I used to host Christmas Eve. My phone remained dark on the side table. Outside, the wind rattled the bare branches. Inside, peace was beginning to feel less like emptiness, and more like reclaimed territory. But the worst part for them still hadn't arrived. Because losing comforts is one thing, losing shelter is another. 30 days after the trust amendments took effect, the real storm arrived taped to their front door. A notice to vacate. Official letterhead. Stark language. Final tone. I didn't see Leo's face when he read it, but David later described the legal sequence to me with the dry calm of a man discussing weather patterns. 2 months unpaid. Trust held lease. Immediate remedy required. No remedy available. The penthouse had never belonged to them in the first place. That revelation, I imagine, must have hit harder than the paper itself, because people can survive bad news more easily than shattered identity. Madison, I'm sure, said what entitled people always say when illusion breaks. What do you mean? We own this place. Did they? Or had they simply been living inside one of my financial decisions? You may recognize that painful distinction between being loved and being funded, between receiving a blessing and mistaking it for a right. Leo knew enough, somewhere deep down, to understand the answer. He just had never needed to say it aloud before. By then, the apartment must have felt different. Bigger, colder, less like a home and more like a stage set already being dismantled from behind the walls. That same afternoon, Madison got a second lesson. Her Range Rover was repossessed from the curb. A tow truck in broad daylight, yellow lights flashing against polished buildings, neighbors pretending not to stare, a uniformed driver with paperwork and no interest in tears. Public embarrassment is brutal because it strips away the private stories people tell themselves. I am sure, Madison argued, demanded, threatened. It would not have mattered. Paperwork is unimpressed by outrage. And that was the day their panic turned into desperation. Not inconvenience, not confusion, desperation. Which is exactly when they decided to come to Connecticut and force a face-to-face confrontation they still believed might work in their favor. They were wrong. I knew they were coming before their car reached the gate. My security system sent a quiet alert to my watch while I was in the rose garden. Vehicle approaching. I didn't check the camera feed. I didn't need to. The garden sat behind a low stone terrace on the east side of the property, where Anna and I had spent years planting, climbing roses, peonies, boxwoods, and a long border of lavender that still held scent even in cool weather. It was her favorite part of the house. Tending it had become my ritual after she died. That afternoon, I put on my noise-canceling headphones and let Bach fill the space where shouting might otherwise have entered. Some of you know that quiet strength, the kind that doesn't announce itself, doesn't perform, doesn't ask to be understood. At the front gate, they pressed the intercom again and again. No answer. I kept pruning. I cut back a crimson rose just above a 5-leaf stem, the way Anna taught me. Clean angle, no hesitation. Eventually they moved along the perimeter and found the ornamental fence where the garden became visible. That's where they saw me. I felt their eyes before I looked up. Leah was waving. Madison too. Mouths moving, arms lifted, urgency everywhere. I did not turn toward them. I did not rush. I did not reward their chaos with my attention. Instead, I inspected a cluster of leaves for black spot, clipped a spent bloom, and moved to the next bush. There's a language in indifference that shouting can never overpower. And they understood it. Even through the fence, even through the distance. They had brought all their noise to my doorstep, believing emotion would reopen every door it once controlled. But the man in the garden was no longer that father. And I think, in that moment, my son saw it. Truly saw it. The problem was, he saw it too late. They shouted for nearly 10 minutes. I know because the security log later noted when the perimeter alert escalated and when local patrol arrived. I never heard their words. Bach protected me from that, but I saw enough. Leo's face red with frustration. Madison first pleading, then pointing, then wiping at her eyes. They looked less like adults solving a problem and more like actors begging an audience not to leave before the final act. Then Marcus arrived. He was the senior patrol officer for our neighborhood mid-50s, calm, broad-shouldered, always polite in the way men become when they no longer need to prove authority. His black sedan rolled up without drama. He stepped out, straightened his jacket, and approached them with measured patience. I removed one headphone just enough to hear the world return in pieces. Wind through the hedges. A distant crow. Marcus speaking evenly. He listened, nodded, then said something that made Leo freeze. I knew what it was before I heard the report later. Private property. Requested to leave. Trespassing if they remained. That must have landed hard. Not son. Not daughter-in-law. Trespassers. You may recognize that boundary the moment someone realizes your kindness was access, not surrender. Marcus escorted them back toward their car. There was no scene after that, no final outburst. Exhaustion had replaced fury. When they drove away, I stood very still in the fading light and let the silence settle back into the garden. Then I clipped one perfect red bloom and held it in my hand. That's a familiar silence, too. The kind that follows when a storm spends itself against a wall it cannot move. That evening, the calls intensified. Unknown numbers. Dozens of them. By midnight, they had crossed from manipulative to frantic. By dawn, the total would reach 109. And somewhere between the 9th voicemail and the 30th, my son finally began to sound less like an heir, and more like a frightened man. They shouted for nearly 10 minutes. I know because Marcus, the patrol officer for our neighborhood, arrived before their anger burned out. I only removed one side of my headphones when he stepped through the gate, his voice low, steady, unhurried. He listened, nodded once. Then he told them the truth they had spent their whole lives avoiding. They were on private property, and they needed to leave. Not as family, not as welcome guests, as trespassers. That word seemed to empty the air around them. Leo stood frozen. Madison's face crumpled. Then they turned back toward their car, smaller somehow. When the tires disappeared down the drive, the garden breathed again. That night, the calls came in waves. Unknown numbers, blocked numbers, numbers borrowed from other people. My phone stayed face down while the house remained still around me. By morning, the log showed 109 missed calls. I listened to the voicemails over coffee. The first ones were angry, then defensive, then pleading. By 3 in the morning, Leo no longer sounded like a man protecting his pride. He sounded like someone watching the floor disappear beneath him. Dad, please, I'm sorry. We were wrong. That word wrong came late. Too late to reopen what had already closed. I called David before finishing my coffee. It's time, I said. And with that, the final meeting was set. I arrived at David's office an hour early. The conference room was all glass, mahogany, and quiet intimidation, the kind of room designed to remind people that decisions made there lasted longer than emotions. The amended trust sat in a leather binder between us. Final. At 10 sharp, Leo and Madison walked in. Stress had thinned them both. Leo's suit still cost money, but now it hung on him. Madison looked polished from a distance, fragile up close. They sat across from me and began the performance. Apologies. Misunderstandings. Pressure. Stress. Words arranged carefully, like flowers set out after a funeral. I said nothing. When Leo finished, I placed both hands on the binder and slid it across the table. Read, I said. Leo opened the binder like a man afraid of what paper could do. His eyes moved quickly, hunting for familiar numbers, familiar protections, familiar proof that this was still negotiable. It wasn't. Page 12, I said. His fingers stopped on the amended beneficiary section. I let the silence settle before speaking. You and Madison have been removed as primary beneficiaries. Madison inhaled sharply. I continued. The monthly disbursements are gone. The credit support is gone. The lease coverage is gone. There are no remaining financial provisions for either of you. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Madison looked up and asked the only question that mattered. So where does the money go? There it was. The truth, finally speaking for itself. I turned one page in my own copy. Page 15, I said. They found the clause, but the title meant nothing to them at first. Then David read it aloud. The Mercer Next Step Scholarship. A permanent educational endowment. Full tuition, housing, and board for first-generation students from low-income families attending the University of Connecticut. $32 million redirected. Not delayed. Not frozen. Redirected. Then I looked at Leo. That's the school you dropped out of after I paid for everything, I said evenly. I thought it was time a Mercer investment helped someone finish what they started. That was the moment his face changed. Not anger. Not shock. Something emptier. As if the life he thought was guaranteed had just stepped around him and chosen someone else. Leo tried once more. Dad, please. There has to be some way to fix this. His voice was softer now, stripped of all the easy arrogance he used to wear like cologne. I held his gaze. There was a way, I said. It was called respect. Madison started crying, then real crying this time, ugly and frightened without strategy. David remained still beside me, letting the room do its work. Leo swallowed hard. What are we supposed to do now? The answer came easily because it was the one answer I should have given years earlier. You work. That word hit harder than any raised voice could have. Work. Earn. Build. Live inside reality. They left smaller than they had arrived. I stayed seated until the door clicked shut. 6 months later, I stood at a podium at the University of Connecticut. The room was filled with students, parents, professors, and the kind of hope money cannot buy once it has been wasted too often. The first scholarship recipients sat in the front row, hands folded tightly, eyes bright with nerves and possibility. I spoke about work, about dignity, About my late wife, who believed character mattered more than polish. Then I said the line I had learned too late in life. A legacy is not what you leave for people to spend. It's what you leave behind for them to build with. The applause was warm, not extravagant. But it meant something. So did the young faces in that room. Over time, I heard pieces of Leo's new life. Nothing dramatic, just ordinary reality. The penthouse was gone. The cars were gone. The invisible machinery that once carried him through each day had been switched off for good. He was working now operations, logistics, schedules, deadlines. Madison was managing stock in a retail store. Their apartment was modest. Their budget, real. I did not celebrate that. In truth, I found a strange peace in it. For the first time, their lives belonged to them. No hidden transfers. No silent rescue. No father standing behind the curtain holding up the scenery. There is dignity and consequence when a person stops running from it. And maybe, in that dignity, there was still a narrow road back. Late that winter, just as the light was thinning over the yard, my phone buzzed on the table beside me. I looked down and saw a message from a number I didn't recognize. One word. Dad? That was all. No explanation, no demand, no performance, just that single word sitting on the screen like someone standing at the edge of a closed gate, unsure whether to knock again. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I leaned back in my chair and listened to the house around me, the old clock in the hallway, the low hum of the heat, the silence between one sound and the next. It was different now. Once, silence had meant absence. It had meant being forgotten, being useful only when needed. But now, it felt like something else entirely. It felt earned. You may recognize that feeling the moment peace no longer feels lonely. The moment boundaries stop feeling cruel and start feeling honest. For years, I confused love with rescue. I thought being a father meant softening every consequence before it could reach my son. But all I really did was delay the lesson and deepen the fall. Now, at last, the choice belonged to me. Not to guilt, not to fear, not to obligation, just to me. I turned the phone over and let the message wait a little longer. Outside, the garden slept beneath the cold. But even in winter, I knew better than most. Some things are not dead. They are simply waiting for the right season to return.